Wow. Well, welcome everyone. Such a cozy setting here in Amsterdam, the first actually. So I have to give you a warm welcome to ZAM Studio in its very first existence. So I'm already feeling that good energy. So I'm just taking it in for a few seconds before we get things started, because that's what I like. I like that setting, and I'm sure that Marcus is also going to tell us more about that and how you appreciate this setting that we are in. Wherever that you are, whether that be South Africa, Ghana, Netherlands, Germany, a warm welcome to you. And yeah, let's get things started as we can. I'm Augustina Austin, I'm your host, and I'm going to take you through this conversation, which I believe is going to be my most, let's say, inspiring one yet. And by the end of it, you're going to find out why. I will assure you. I'd encourage you to ask any questions because we are going to make sure in true ZAM style that you have the opportunity to ask your questions as well. I know there's also an opportunity for people who are tuning in live to be able to ask their questions. And then we'll round it up, of course, with the bottle noches and the glass of wine and everything, the water maybe, that you're drinking on. All right, so you are now part of an experiment because ZAM Studio is in its first setting. ZAM has never done this before, so I even feel privileged to be doing this in a cozy setting that I really appreciate. So we are live. If there is anyone that has a burning question, make sure that you email it. We do have a space for that to info@zammagazine.com, or Twitter is also there. You can find ZAM Magazine and use the hashtag StudioZAM. So that's also a special hashtag. Our guest that we have here today, I am honored to introduce him. But before that, let's just give you a bit of perspective and also explain why we are here. Our guest, as being anything, nor by defining his being, except from what he actually actively is doing right now. The emphasis on that, which is being the director of the Prins Claus Fund. And he started at the beginning of this year. Prins Claus Fund. For those of you who don't know the fund, it was founded exactly on the 70th birthday of the Dutch Prins Claus in 1996. And believes that culture is a basic need. And the emphasis is on a basic need. I agree with that so much. The fund supports, honors, and connects artists and cultural practitioners from Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, and Eastern Europe, with special attention to areas where cultural expression is under great pressure. And since 2021, they've reorganized, so we're in a quite amazing space. They reorganized their funding scheme to offer support to people in all phases of professional development, from young, starting artists through to seasoned ones, with an important and impactful over. So that's what we're also going to talk about today. So let's talk about our guest, finally. He currently is responsible for the management of this impressive task, yet to nevertheless do justice to the totality of his experience and background. And I'd like to mention a few things that he has done before he got here. So it's not a small person at all. Stemming from a musical family, he grew up in Mamelodi. Do I say that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Hey. Township in Pretoria, South Africa, amidst two brothers. It's funny because I am the second born as well.
Yeah.
From church choirs, he moved into stages that became increasingly bigger and bigger, to say the least, singing in both operas and high-end musical productions on a national and international scale. And he proceeded directing various South African opera productions. But over the past 10 years, he has mainly been working as an administrator in the arts, a busy one at that. And he has been educating, mentoring, and just before COVID, he even set up a new theater. That's not a small task. And also, he has been studying the possibilities for a sustainable future of the arts academically. So just give him a warm applause. Welcome, Marcus Tebogo Desando.
Thank you. It's a bit odd hearing people read who you are, because it feels like...
Why is that?
Ah.
You deserve like every praise
Yeah.
is part of that.
I don't know. Maybe it's because I've really aspired to spending my life sitting in the background and rather creating opportunities than being in as part of those opportunities. I'm
Yeah.
sure as you will notice as you were reading, I kept looking more and more and more down because I'm like, okay, let's hide.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that because that's also the what I find the most fascinating side of your story. But first, Amsterdam. How is Amsterdam treating you? Another welcome. I'm sure you've had plenty of welcomes, but
Yes.
welcome to Amsterdam. How is Amsterdam
Thank you
treating
so
you?
much. I am loving, in particular, the efficiency of the city. I love, except on weekends
Yeah.
when they decide to start fixing the roads or something like that. But
Yeah.
I absolutely love Amsterdam. I've been here now for 2.5 months, and I'm really looking forward to making it my home. It's so much so that I think my first permanent home will be in Amsterdam instead of looking outside. So really,
Look at that.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Exciting.
yeah.
You do a lot. I would say, I wouldn't say you're versatile, you're so much more. Is doing a lot an interesting trick as not to be easily defined? And if that is, how come?
You know, growing up in a home of a lot of people. So I mean, I grew up in my grandmother's house. My parents divorced when we were very young. So my mom moved back home, and so really we grew up in a huge family. We were like, I think at one stage 21 in the house, and it was a small house. That you grow to define yourself by your presence because the quieter you are, the more they forget that you're there. So it's really kind of fighting for your own space.
I can imagine 21.
Yeah.
21.
So I've gotten busy to, I suppose when I was growing up, to really get out of inertia, because that's what you end up doing if you grow up in kind of environments that are not really conducive for real growth and access. And I've always done a lot. I mean, from being a child, I was always singing in the school choir, singing in the church choir, in what they called the drum majorettes at the time. Running, and then at the same time at home being quite a busybody, and so I suppose I learned to constantly do a lot more than I should, I think, at times, because it's really part of who I am. So even with my professional world, I mean, you mentioned the fact that I mentor, I teach, I work full time in companies. I started at theater. All of it, I take it with a stride, because for some reason it doesn't feel like it's a lot to me. It just feels like I'm doing what I need to do. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was about to ask, do you avoid being framed? But you taking us through to where it all started, to being in a home, 21 people, and finding your voice, it just answers that question very well.
Yeah, yeah. Now, but also at the same time, I do like to not think of myself as someone who has a title, right? Because I think really having a title almost limits you. I remember having a conversation with Bart about, he was like, we might ask you to sing. I said, it will never happen, right? and the reason for that is because the idea of being defined by just one aspect of your life is a bit unfair. Not just to you, but also to the work that you do, because then people also then frames your existence with that one particular thing. So that's why I really don't like the kind of labels.
And you even mentioned being framed as a creative, that it was even exoticized.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about that. Why is that association?
I suppose, look, I think maybe right now it's a little bit different, because I think Europe has really been very blessed with a lot of South African opera singers, very good South African opera singers. But when I started singing opera, I was one of 5 professional opera singers in the country. And so there was a whole idea of exoticism around a black person singing opera, and it became kind of like a descriptor of you as a person. And I started fighting it then. And when I became an administrator, which I absolutely love because I think I can really do more for what I love in terms of paying forward. I'll talk about that a bit later. I get very emotional around the creative space because as a young person, that's really the outlet that created the person that you see today. And I want to pay it forward. And I know that for me right now, the best way of paying it forward is becoming an administrator and working in an environment where you can really effect change in a much more broader way. And when people look at you and they see you as an opera singer, the first thing they do is they want you to sing. And then secondly, that's what they look at you as, like, he's a performer. But in essence, I want to, as you said earlier on, I want to be seen as what I actually am doing instead of what I was or what other aspects of what I'm doing.
Right.
Because all of it, in essence, creates the one person.
And at which point was that defined for you?
I, so for me, it was, I think around 1998. I don't think I've ever told anyone this, but around 1998, I was working in Germany at the time with a touring company, and I decided to go back home, to South Africa. And my then mentor asked me, "Why are you back?" And I said, "Because I want to pay back to my country and create more of me that can really wow the world." And at the time I was just thinking about voices. If any of you have ever heard South African voices, they are incredible, and so
To me, the best singers.
right, they're really there, right? I mean, especially opera singers, really amazing. And at the time, because I was one of the first ones, my talent was nowhere near those. But I thought I'd be a great teacher, a great educator, and start creating those. And that was a turning point for me, because then I realized I was more than just a singer. I was actually someone that could possibly effect change in a way that was never imagined. And in a matter of 5 years from that time, South Africa changed from being a 95% white opera singer career to a 90% black opera singers. So it really kind of shifted. I'm not taking credit for it, but there was a movement of really making, the art form of opera also as democratized as everything else. And it was really that defining moment for me that I could be more than just a performer.
You did mention that, and you mentioned that it did something to your career. Could you take us back to that time, that space? I'm just curious.
Well, pioneering anything in the world is not comfortable, right? It's not a comfort. I don't think you would ever meet a pioneer that said, "Oh, I had it easy."
Yeah.
But I think the idea of being a catalyst of change in a world that sees itself so differently is, I mean, first of all, it's a drug, right? Because as a person, it's a drug, because you really get a sense of a high when something goes right. When you look at either a mentee or someone that you've been working with really becoming amazing, it's what do you call it? Serotonin? Is it? And so for me, even though it was a decision that I made it was an emotional decision, what it actually became was a quest for bettering not just myself, but the community that I live around. And it made me a happier person. Yeah, so I'm joyful when I'm at work, and it's a challenging job. I mean, if you know what running an organization feels like, it's not the most pleasant of jobs.
Right.
But I go to bed really happy. I wake up every morning without trepidation, because I know that I'm going to be creating something or I'm going to be part of the creation of something that will be meaningful to someone. Yeah.
So let's talk a bit more about you creating something and the time
Yeah.
when you started creating something. And that was the transition from apartheid to democracy. Some would say that, you know, shifting to another space in time means that sky's the limit.
Yeah.
You know, what was your experience like creating, being?
That, you know, I have it's not as special as sometimes you might think it is. At the time in South Africa, we were so polarized as a nation that even when democracy was created, black people were really quite angry, right? I mean, we were put in a situation where we had to accept a world that we didn't create, and also a world that we didn't partake in settling for, right? So there was a lot of, at the time I was living in a white world. I would say I was already, because I was already an opera singer. You know, my career started, I'm aging myself, but it started around 87 when I was still an early teenager. And so I lived very much in a white world. So what it meant was really kind of the creation of one's identity in a way that they never thought was possible. Because up until then, you lived in a world that, again, as I said, what wasn't shaped by you. And then when democracy hit, you suddenly hit with an opportunity to really co-create a world that you can really stand very firm and proud of. And so that for me meant that I could finally become a person that would stand very proudly saying I'm a black person, not a black person that tries to fit into a white world, but a black person, just a black person sitting in that space. So yeah, so it was quite a, you know, it gave you freedom of a different nature. I think it wasn't just the freedom of, you know, you're free, you can now, you know, roam around, but it gave you a freedom of really accepting who you are, in a world that, again, as I said, that wasn't, it means a lot to me, this thing about the world that wasn't created by you, but somehow it keeps going back to that, you know, that you can now start claiming your space in that world. And that was really quite amazing. I think cathartic is the right word, but it made me own my own responsibility to my people.
Yeah. Creating your space. I love that.
Yeah.
I really love that. So let's talk about icons that helped you push through. Are there any icons for you during that time, that space and
Yeah.
time?
I'm very practical in a ways. I've always I've had a lot of helping hands, and I called them my angels for a very long time. Also because I had the same way I have problems labeling myself, I also have problems accepting my own role in my own success.
Yeah.
That you always think there's someone along the way that has actually helped you, and so for me, I've had my angels, and there were quite a few, but they were really ordinary people when you think about it. I don't have any particular heroic type of icon that people can talk about, but I had amazing people that, as a young black boy in South Africa who was at the time 15 years old with no prospects of ever going anywhere, universities denying you entrance because your choice of subject is not something that they would give to black people, or even bursaries for you to study, that, you know, that they would open those doors. So for me, I don't have like famous icons, but I have wonderful people. There was a lady called Matilda Honsfeld, who is a pianist, who at times where I could have just given up as a young boy was there for me. And it moved along with a lot of other people, some probably just one day act that I really recognized in my being, to my mentor, who is Angelo Gobato, whom really, without him, South African opera would still be white. That he made a very conscious decision, an Italian-born man who was naturalized living in South Africa, that said, I've heard that voices in South Africa are amazing, and I'm going to make them the face of opera in this country. And yeah, and so, I mean, there's a lot more, but those two really for me.
Yeah. Who's your mentor, right?
Yeah. So Angelo was my mentor for quite a number of years. I hope I'm his most successful protege.
I'm sure you are.
Yeah,
I'm sure you
we
are.
should ask him one day.
I'm sure you are. And we spoke earlier on, of some of the things that you looked up from ZAM, like the Mandela
Yeah.
event that happens every year. Um, what is your connection to Mandela?
Well, besides the fact that I've sung for him, I can really sort of like claim that. Not a lot of people can say that, but it seems to be a thing in South Africa. We all claim that we've sung for Mandela. We've shaken his hand and we've danced with him with his famous dance, and and we all claim to know some of his quotes and all of that. Yeah, I mean, I think what the man represented for our country was. It was very interesting. I think it ties back to what I was saying about my own life, that he was really kind of very unilaterally actually navigating the country to a place where we ended up being quite comfortable with ourselves as a society. And so when one looks up to him, you see the possibilities of patience and tenacity in a human that that one can really learn from Mandela. And I've carried that with my own work and what I do in my own personal life and with I think if you ask my team even right now, I always say to them, slow down, right? And it's not just an African thing, but it's a very Mandela thing, saying nothing should be rushed, because when you sit in that moment, that's when things become clearer. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And that same goes for art as well,
Oh yeah.
right?
Oh
The
yeah.
development of it.
Look, I
And
think the thing about art and the development of it is that you cannot just expect an 18-year-old to be an expert in running an organization, but also you can't expect them to know it in 6 months. So the investment of taking the time and taking them through the process, having them learn the ropes either with you or beside you, or with you guiding them, takes time. It takes a lot of time and patience and trial and a lot of failure. But then in that failure you go back again and you do it. So definitely that takes that time.
I love that. Very, very much needed advice in this space and time that we are in, where art seems as you can develop it in a very fast pace. Speaking of art, because it's your business now.
Yes.
It is. How would you define and defend art?
Okay, so if I go back to the context of the Prince Class Fund, culture is a basic need, right? And that was really it was inspired from looking at culture as being recognized as part of development in general, right? Because development, what that means is also another problematic term that I'm not. One day we'll talk about it in the world around what is development. Who has the right to say they can develop? But to place culture as an aspect of development is really, really important, because as we have learned during COVID, that without it we would have been living in dark ages,
Very dark.
locked in our homes with really very little to do. But for me, art is more than just something that is conceptual or or kind of cerebral. I come from a world where art is your everyday life. I mean, what you walk to a taxi rank and you see people sell art. You see people use art on a day-to-day basis. You go into your home and art is not just hung on the walls or put in a museum, but it is part of your everyday existence. So for me, art represents life in general, and I think once we realize that's what it is, that's why there isn't so many museums and galleries that hold work that could be used on a day-to-day basis in Africa, because it's part of your life and it's not as mystified. So yeah, So for me, art is life, and not in the most beautiful way that we want to put it, but in real everyday existence.
And how would you describe the role of art in developing countries? Let's call it for now, developing
Yeah,
countries.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Firstly, I think we can't dictate what art is to developing countries, mostly because of what I said about the fact that it's an everyday life thing. But what is really important is that the voice, and not voice as in like physical voice, but the kind of language that art uses is is used to challenge, to comfort, to grow, to defend, and most importantly, it creates access for emotions and in also in the most beautiful way money, right? Because money is important for all of us, but it creates all of those access. And I think developing worlds have probably the most um, tangible way of explaining it than a lot of us can, because it is a lived experience for them.
Yeah.
So, but also at the same time, we should never see the developing world from a space of need, because the developing world is abundant, and if we look at it from a place of abundance, we will probably learn more from the developing world than think that they need the developing agents like ours. Yeah, I
So
hope that makes sense.
to me, it does.
Okay, great.
Absolutely. I'm thinking of your journey starting in 1987, before I was born, by the way. I just had to point that out.
I have
So
gray
it's,
hair, so it's okay.
with all of the aspects of your journey, now you have Prince Klaus Fund. They're moving away from their, let's say, their traditional model.
Yeah.
And here comes you as being the director. Why, could you point out what exactly is changing and why is it necessary at this time with you involved?
Yeah. Whew. I'm not as much of a narcissist as or maybe I think I'm not as much as
Right.
a narcissist that I probably am. But I do think that I'm quite privileged to be joining the fund at this stage, because with the new strategy, it took away the cumbersomeness of working with mostly organizations and really looking at individuals. And it's attractive to me because there is less red tape. There is more that one can create a sense of independence with individuals that you don't get with organizations. Not saying that you don't have it with organizations, but I think there's a lot more immediacy with individuals. And and what I loved about the strategy when I joined the organization was that it gives me an opportunity to probably, in a way, achieve what my dream would be. And my dream in the development space is one of self-sustaining ecosystem. And that, I mean, my studies are also looking at something of that nature, but focused a little bit differently. But I'm really bringing on board the love and the need of creating an ecosystem that can really stand on its own, that it can sustain itself, that it can self-realize. We again coming from that place of not looking at developing world as needing, but rather that they have abundance, and we just need to be able to find a space where we can cultivate that abundance into an ecosystem that is healthy, that thrives in itself, and not necessarily looking towards development agents for support. And so I hope that in 5 years' time, I will have a very tangible and measurable ecosystem that would have been created by the team and I. I'm very collaborative, so I never pretend I do everything or I know everything. Because I hope that, and I have a fantastic team that really co-thinks with me, which is really beautiful. And I hope that in 5 years' time, we already have a beginning of an ecosystem that would start looking at how to self-sustain. We already have it. We already have with some of our different beneficiaries and participants that they're already starting to seek each other out and work and collaborate with each other. And we just want to make it that much bigger. So I hope that I would leave a community that is much healthier in itself, that our job becomes more of catalysts rather than developers. And so that is for me
Yeah,
that's a big dream.
it is.
That's a huge dream. Yeah.
And you spoke about supporting young artists in their early stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you share more a bit about this approach and how this is going to contribute to that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, also, we have, I mean, in the fund, we have 3 different stages. You could call it stages of awards, as we call them. So we have the Seed Awards, we have the Mentorship Awards, and we have the Impact Awards. So the Seed Awards really looking at emerging artists in the first 5 years of their careers. This is the most under-resourced demographic in the creative sector because nobody wants to give money to anyone that has no track record or that has no backing of any sort, either from an organization, but just the idea of you want to create something or you want to there's something that you want to say, and which we beautifully do. I mean, we have a diverse group of seed awardees from last year, and we just finished an open call for this year. But all of them are so amazing that they are fearless in their work. And that fearless is created by a little bit of access. It's not great, but it's a little bit of access. Then you have the Mentorship Award, which is looking at more established artists that are starting to look at different themes within the work that they do and how to really change the world. And then, of course, you have the Impact Awards, which is looking at, there's no age limit or even delineation in that, with individuals that are really now doing something, that are change makers, that are really having an impact in the society that they have. But the reason I mentioned those 3 because I want to go back to the Seed Award. The reason why it's so important with Seed Awardees or emerging artists is that is our future. Those are the people that will be driving the cultural space in 40, 50 years' time. And it's great that we can really invest in individuals that I have already, that I established, that are doing great work, been around for 10 years or maybe 20 years. But we also need to remember that we are not here in perpetuity, right? So we're going to need to really start building up the next generation of people. I mean, the one thing that was really quite, and I love that about Prince Claus himself, was the belief that culture has the power to transform the world. But transformation of our world is not just created by people that have the experience, but it's also those fearless young ones that have almost have nothing to lose in a way, because they really throw themselves at it, and they also need as much of that support.
Yeah. I love that. Speaking of your studies, because you just mentioned your studies, you are currently doing a PhD on leadership and business in art.
Yeah.
Very specific. What was your personal experience making that transition from artist to leader, business-oriented leader, administrator, and heading on to a PhD?
Yeah. Because I think that it would be foolhardy to think you can lead a sector if you don't understand how to do it. Instinct is not always enough. Sometimes we have to have some kind of backing and education and access to people that you can really think with in an educational environment helps you either secure your own idea of what you want to do, or it opens your world to so many other ways of doing things. And I decided to do, firstly, I decided to pursue my master's in leadership, because I felt that I needed to learn a little bit more before I can really fully immerse myself as an impact creator. I've just made that up.
I like the sound of it.
So,
You can
so
sell it anytime.
yeah, right. So I just wanted to create an opportunity that I can walk into a space with comfort, knowing that I do have a little bit more knowledge, and I didn't want to just be driven by instinct. And when I got into my PhD, my master's actually, rather, I really loved the fact that I could leave a part of my own mind in how to transform the industry. So my master's was on leadership regeneration in the performing arts in South Africa, in particular in performing arts, because performing arts in my country is probably the most poorly resourced, but also the kind of leadership that we have in my country is not always individuals that go and study to be leaders before they become leaders. It's really kind of like a natural progression from being very similar to me, being a performer, then possibly doing something better, and then and then one day you wake up and you're running a company. And so I wanted to try and find a theory that could possibly define what that leader could be. And my PhD, I wanted to take it a little bit further and look at how to create a sustainable and self-reliant industry, but looking at performing arts and visual arts in South Africa again, in particular there, and creating a theory of how to introduce, and it becomes almost a very psychological a stance, but how to introduce the creative sector, in particular those two sectors, into the socio-economic landscape of South Africa, so that they can start thinking of themselves as contributors instead of, again, starting from a place of need, but rather that they come from a place of abundance. I hope to finish it. PhDs are a beast. 1 minute you're clever, the next minute you're the stupidest person in the world.
There's some challenges.
Yes, and you leave it alone. But it really is to try and achieve, and I suppose that's what I carry with me with all the work that I do in every organization I go to, is to carry that need to create an ecosystem that can be self-reliant.
Yeah. Very strategic.
I think so. Yeah.
Because the way you highlighted, not just driven by instinct. Yeah.
I think it's because, people think creatives are not business people, and it's not true. Because to create is already a form of entrepreneurship. Because if you don't have the money, and I don't know, there's a lot of artists that you find that are foragers, right? And they go and they just forage, and they forage things, and then they come up with this most amazing sculpture, and people go, oh, it's amazing. They buy it for 50,000 euros, and it costs that person really kind of their feet walking around, and maybe a few cents there and there to put it together, and their time, right? But it's about how do you then also see yourself as a contributor to the ecosystem and the socio-economic landscape, because in essence you created something out of very little that is now worth a lot more. That is business.
Yeah.
And so we it's, if you take away that doubt in oneself and you really instill the security of it, you will create an industry that, well, again, it's big dream, but you'll create an industry that can stand its own next to big business.
Yeah, that's a good perspective, because a lot of creatives, or now I'm just using a term that is, just like you said, exoticized, don't value that work in that way or in that sense. It's time, effort. All right, so we talked about Ubuntu earlier on
Yes,
today.
yes.
And in the approach you champion, you highlight the importance of Ubuntu in general. And what, I know it's kind of a heavy question, but just to touch on it a little, what is Ubuntu actually? And we hear about it a lot. A lot of organizations, and also something that you mentioned, don't look at the specifics. So, what would you say is Ubuntu?
Okay, so I mean, there are different ways I mean, it has been described, a lot about, I'm you because you are kind of thing. And
Yeah.
it's really true. That's really, I am who I am because of the person that's next to me or people in your life or. But what it means is that there's an interconnectedness of us as humans that is much deeper than what we see on face value. So I was telling you as well earlier on that I had a friend who coined Ubuntu in a different way, and she always used to say Ubuntu is recognizing the divinity in the other person, right? So which means that you see yourself and you see the other person as more than just an entity that can be removed, but you recognize them as this divine being. But what is even more important about that is that you recognize every other divinity and divine people that were behind them, that have created who they are. So when you are in a working environment and you operate from that place of Ubuntu, you operate from a place of care, you operate from a place of growth, and more importantly, you operate from a place of nurturing. So I think that what Ubuntu teaches us, which is, I mean, in essence, is humanity, right? What is humanity? So for me, humanity as an Ubuntu as a concept is about what is it that drives us as people. You look at divinity, but what's even more important is that you look at love for oneself. And love for oneself means that you will not do anything that's going to harm you. So everything that you do should never come back to you to harm you. And if you recognize the person as, I am here because of them, it means they're doing the same, which means that you love yourself a lot more, and which means everything else you do comes from that love. And that's really what Ubuntu is. It's as simple as being on time, it's simple as greeting someone, it's as simple as recognizing who they are. As I mentioned earlier on, it's even walking in the streets and looking at the next person and greeting them, whether they respond or not, because that is recognizing that divinity in them. Yeah.
And we're talking to you, a South African. The philosophy stems from South Africa. But it also seems like it has still a particular relevance to the reality of South Africa still. Would you agree to this?
Unfortunately, I would, yes. I mean, I know we're not doing very well right now as a country, and it has to really be admitted. But but it's again a systemic issue of not of what is the word that I'm looking for? Not ignorance, but of neglect, because again, if you operate from a place of Ubuntu and you operate from a place of love, whatever you do, even in your context, whether you're a leader or you are an ordinary citizen, is that you will not do anything that would harm the next person. But unfortunately, as humans, we tend to look a little bit more, inwards and more towards ourselves. And as a country, I think what's represented in the outside world is really almost, close. I'm not going to say failed state, but close to it, right? But the people of South Africa are probably some of the most resilient human beings in the world. We come from apartheid. We didn't kill anyone. in the same numbers that the rest of the world. There was no civil war. Well, whether it was engineered or not, because there's a lot of conversations around that it was an engineered kind of settlement, and there's issues, but there was no destruction of general humanity to transition from that space of real oppression that was really kind of dehumanizing of individuals to a country that was very open in how it received themselves and people around them. And so, yes, we might be failing, as our government is failing and right now, but what is really kind of heartwarming about the country is that we will still not be going to that route of civil war, mainly because of that idea that your neighbor is your family, is a human being, is someone that you need to care for. Obviously, there's exceptions, but really that's what keeps us going.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, we're here. People are tuning in live from wherever in the world, and we're just going to go into a short break, come right back, and of course answer some of our pressing questions. So let's do this.
Cool. Are you all right? You're so quiet. You're all so quiet. Yes, you are.
Ja, maar zo, oké. Want ik snel even doen mijn telefoon op stil, want hij blijft maar trillen. Ik weet ook niet waarom.
Was it you who was buzzing the whole time?
Man. I was like, no, not today. All right, well, welcome back. I did not want to interrupt that conversation at all, but I just had to. And we're here. I wouldn't say that we're rounding up the conversation, but we're just getting more of a dive in a bit more. And of course, answering some of the questions that we have here. We talked earlier on, and there are a bit of punchlines that I can still, drop, which is creating your space, starting all the way back in 1987, and Ubuntu, and being versatile, not being framed, understanding that you are not connecting yourself to just being an opera singer or any of that, but you're actually combining every aspect of your journey, and not just being driven by intuition, but also pursuing the PhD.
Yes. Pray that I finish it soon.
How has your South Africa experience, how is it relevant to your position now? I know we touched on it a bit.
Yeah.
But why specifically your experience and your journey to this task that you have on now?
I think the kind of plus of being South African and walking into this space is that I understand a lot more of the world's dividing cultures, because I live in a country where, first of all, we have 9 official languages, so which means we have 9 different ethnic groups that are living in the country that have different needs, that express themselves in a very different way. We live in a country where you could think of us as a developing country, but in a lot of ways we're really kind of first world. But then we are also very third world. And it's really around understanding the needs of different people in different contexts. And I remember I was asked by someone once, what is your experience of dealing with royalty? And I said, but how different is that from being where I come from, where you could interact with anyone from someone who really for them, the basic need is just, sometimes even just having shoes and then food, to having people that live in mansions and with 5 or 6 cars in their garages. So South Africa really prepares a lot of people in understanding the world in a much broader way than one would think. And when you're in it, you don't realize, you don't even think that's the case. But it's only when you're outside of the country and you realize, oh my word, actually, this has trained me to really recognize the different kind of values of people in different contexts. So for me, that is really kind of a strong gift in South Africa. But also what I always want to take with is that we are really kind of very tenacious as people, and our tenacity is infectious. And so when you walk into a space, of the north, as and you don't come any closer to the north as as the Netherlands, is that I bring with me a sense of strength, of um, resilience, of fearlessness in a way. I'm not going to say I'm fearless, but you deal with issues head on because you know you have to, because you know that by not doing it, you do more harm than good. So you wake up every morning and you walk in and you smile and you laugh out loud. We are possibly, I don't know how many people even in the audience knows of any nation that laughs at itself as much as South Africans do. South Africans think that they are the stupidest and the funniest people in the world. We laugh at ourselves. We make fun of ourselves all the time. And it's because of that creates a sense of strength and resilience. And I hope that I can instill that a lot more here, and that I can carry on with it with the work that I do with the Prince Claus Fund, but also in the kind of interactions I have outside of it.
Yeah. So Prince Claus Fund is a Dutch fund, and it operates in the global south.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of discussion about this ongoing, because the question can then arise, wouldn't it then force the agenda in a particular direction? And how much space would an artist really get?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, already by having me there
Right.
is a great, not completely a deterrent, but it was a great help to avoid that. Because I can really call the bullshit out, in essence. It's not, I'm also not oblivious of the kind of thinking that might be out there, even
Yeah.
from the South itself, and how they look at the Prince Claus Fund. Because yes, it is a Dutch organization that has a lot of historical context that we don't always talk about, and
Yeah.
and so people see you with a certain amount of power that they cannot challenge, because that would mean that they don't get the funding, or they but what is so beautiful about the fund is that we have individuals in organizations that are champions for the people that are beneficiaries. Besides me, I mean, I don't have to do a lot, because in itself, in the organization, the members that are dealing directly with beneficiaries are really protectors of beneficiaries. We really start from a place of care. And recognize that we are privileged, and the power dynamics are never going to be the same. That yes, people are going to treat us differently because of the power that we have, but we really look to. We might not be able to change people's perceptions of coming from the north, but we certainly try and not influence in how people function. Obviously, subjectivity, creeps in there and there, but we have a very strong philosophy of unrestricted funding that we have inculcated in the organization, especially with a new strategy, is that with the unrestricted funding, it means that we do not tell anyone how to spend their money at all. We do not have mandates that we impose on them. All they need to be able to do is to show us that they actually achieved what they wanted to achieve from the application process. The mentorship aspect of the organization, we don't have a direct hand in it. We use mentors that are industry experts, that are always also very aware of those power dynamics, that I'm not even allowed in sessions, in mentorship sessions, as the head of an organization, because that immediately shifts the power dynamics. I'm not allowed in actually any of these kind of interactions, because you need to create a safe space where people can create without having to think that I need to make my boss happy or I need to make my grant maker happy. So we are very much aware of that. And much so, I'm very much aware of that, because I know that I'm ultimately going to be responsible. Um, I'm not going to endorse a northern way of thinking carelessly. It has to be people's ability to create their own reality is really important. And to quote again the prince, I'm so studied. Hey, I can quote him. Okay.
Right.
So to quote even the prince, he said, you cannot tell someone how to develop themselves. Only they know how to do that. And we are now really embodying that as an organization. And even with my dream of creating this ecosystem that is sustainable, I'm going to be looking at individuals that can really tell us what they need, instead of us devising for ourselves what they need.
Yeah. Kind of grassroots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also really honest, kind of very transparent way of working, recognizing the power dynamics. I think it's important that we constantly have to even say that to people. We recognize the power dynamics, we want to break it up. And that is why the idea of me not being involved in some of these kind of conversations makes it that much easier for people to not feel that they have to please the grant maker.
Are there any challenges defending this, what you believe in, which is relatively new to the organization?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is finding partners and funders that will also sign on to that, because it is a foreign concept. The idea of grant making in the world is about control, and it's about reporting. It's about numbers. It's about measuring impact in a quantifiable way, which is really kind of, if you can't give me numbers and you can't show me how they did it and what they did and where they did it at, you might not get money again. So yes, the challenges is really, firstly, luckily right now, most of our current funders are really quite happy with how we function, but we are constantly looking for new partners and for sponsors, and it's really saying to them, but there is power in that unrestricted funding, because we're also asking for that unrestricted funding. So whatever we're asking for, we would like it to also be transferred to the people that receive the grants. And it is a challenge, because it's about how do you quantify it, and we don't have the answer yet. But it's interesting that it is a conversation that is being had now by a lot of grant makers that are working in the developing countries around how do we then create this system of unrestricted funding without it looking like we're just throwing money in water.
Yeah, very important
to
secure that. So what is your vision for arts and the fund? What is your vision, speaking from your position as of now?
Yeah. That's a tough one, because I think, vision for culture as a whole is that we need to demystify the idea that culture is a pastime. That in actual fact, culture is, if not the biggest contributor to the world's soul and the world's pure existence, right? I mean, everything we've created, the chairs, what we're sitting on, the streaming, is all stemming from creative individuals, and it would be wonderful to not have to defend it, not have to even explain to anyone what culture is, because culture is a lived experience, and we live it every day. I hope that's a good enough answer. It's a very, I sometimes dream, right? So, but I do believe that we as cultural practitioners and developing agents, we have the responsibility to really elevate the value of culture from merely something that people do to feel good, but for something that they need to feel good.
Wow. So on that note, um, it's time for questions, and you have the opportunity to ask. So if you have one that you thought of or one that you've written down, I will hear it from you and I'll repeat it because that's simply because of mic setup and so that people could hear the question really good. While you do that, while you gather your questions, I'd like to make a brief announcement because the printed version of the inspiring Nelson Mandela Live Lecture by Yvonne Owo is now available. So if you are here, make sure to pick one up. It's only $5.95 if you're watching online or forgot your money. So you can also order it online at zammagazine.com. So for the questions, you can feel free to raise your hand. I'll point you out and I'll repeat your question, of course, for the people. So on to you. Are there any questions? Ooh. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah. Now I'll be starting with acknowledging that I'm a little bit confused. I'm from the Congo and I live almost 30 years in the Netherlands. And I know almost all the funds from the Netherlands saying or pretending to help Africa. So seeing you sit there, being the director of class funds, I'm a little bit confused. Because 6 months ago, we started this organization to challenge all the organizations from the Netherlands who pretend to help Africa. How many people from African descent they are employing? So we want to do that on a PhD way.
Diplomatic way.
To establish that there is a difference between what people say and what people do. So I'm a little bit confused, but I do have a question. You mentioned sometimes that you are not following only your instinct and you went back to school. One of the things we are living here in the Netherlands as diaspora is that when you do something sustainable, people tend to look at the study you followed at the Western curriculum. Because it's impossible to give a contribution from the instinct. And because when you didn't go to school, you follow your instinct. So I'm a little bit troubled by hearing that doing PhD, we contribute more to what you are already been doing. So I trusted the instinct. I mistrust the PhD because it makes me part of a curriculum which made South Africa, which made apartheid. Yeah? Exaggerating a little bit to discuss among friends. So why, let me put this way. Is that a problem that instinct can also be part of contribution? So help me to believe that it's possible.
Do you want to repeat that? And then
Yes, yes. Quickly to summarize, what's your name again?
Paul Bikai.
Paul Bikai.
Yeah.
Pleasure to meet you. You explained that you are in quite a confused position where you would really like some clarification, and that is because you come from a place where you are now challenging Dutch organizations who say they help Africa to really measure or highlight or to truly test their impact, to summarize it correctly. And then also coming back to the approach that was highlighted, instinct combined with the PhD. In which order is there space for PhD, which is according to a Western curriculum, relevant for Africa? If I've summarized that well.
Yeah, that's correct.
All
yes, right. I got that, yes. I appreciate your confusion, and I hope that the confusion continues. Because I think that is it. I was also a little bit confused when I was hired. Because, again, for me, being someone of color, being from South Africa, I did ask that question, and I said, but I asked why me? Why a black South African person to head this organization? And the response that I got was, I still have to interrogate more because I think that it's almost like it's an easy way out kind of thing. And it was, you were the most capable, right? So I'm going to leave it at that, right? So we're going to carry on being confused, I think, as people. I would like to, for my own self, I would like to believe that is a very good reason, because otherwise I would be diminishing my own success as an administrator and as someone that believes in development work. To respond to your question, I do not diminish, and I think I didn't say you cannot create leaders from instinct. I said, on my experience, I wanted to learn more to be able to create the kind of impact that I think I will be able to do. And also I said, the thing about studying postgrad is that it creates community and access for you to have more than one person who either thinks like you or who will be able to actually open your world. And working as a creative in isolation does not give you that access. And so for me, studying was that. The reason why I'm doing a PhD, besides the fact that I think that from an egotistic point of view, I will leave something behind, is that also people listen to you when you have DR in front of your name.
Right.
And so ultimately, at some point in the world, being Dr. Desando will be great for my cause. And so I'm not naive about those kind of choices. Thank you, though, for your question. I think it's fantastic. Yeah.
And to admit that you're confused. I think that takes a lot.
Yeah.
I want to be confused.
Yeah, no, we have to be more confused. And I have to say that in the organization, this is not anyway a qualification, but we already have, I'm the third person from Africa, of African descent, who is working for the organization. So just to put it up there.
Out of how many people?
We are 16.
1/6?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's quite balanced for the
Is
Dutch.
that something you'd like to change in your tenure?
No, I am not going to be a proponent of turning the Dutch face to a black one. That is, I think that people who were hired in the organization who also are of African descent were hired because of a very rigorous recruitment system, and they were the best candidates. So it wouldn't be about changing color, but it would be about carrying on recognizing the best candidate for the job. They might be whatever nationality. But also with the fund, out of the 16 in the organization, there's only 4 native Dutch people. So that's also important to note, that as an organization, we're really quite global in the people that work with us.
Prince Klaus was not native.
Yeah, see, that's another thing. Yes.
Same. Prince Klaus was not native. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
perspective.
thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions? Go.
Marcus, with part of the audience, at least in the Netherlands, I think there's an idea of, a not very well informed idea of the Klaus Fund, a bit elitist maybe, and also very much doing good for people in Africa or in Asia, Latin America. And you spoke about the abundance that one comes across while looking at development in Africa, for instance. And having lived there for quite some time, I fully agree with that. And like the way people challenge power relations, the way they look at society, the societal approach that you find in their work, while they're not being forced to do that. It's out of their own choice. The combination of the artistic and the entrepreneurial that one comes across with so many people actually in Johannesburg, where I lived for quite some time. Now my question is, do you see a role for you or for the fund also to communicate to the Dutch audience, or international audience, or Western audience, or whatever way you want to put it, that it's not us helping them, but it's also understanding the world they live in, which looks in many ways very much like our own world, the ideas, the vision, the abundance that you speak about. So it's a two-way thing, and is that something that the Klaus Fund, breaking through those perceptions that are so much alive, so they're changing, but they're still very much vivid.
Yeah.
Is that something that you feel would be the role of the Klaus Funds as well?
So your question is if the Prince Claus Fund feels, or at this point, a responsibility to change the perspective of the West, so to say the West, whether that be Netherlands or the international, of the focusing countries or continents.
Well, I think we do have a duty to, and in particular, going back to that question, by the mere fact that we communicate that our work is focused on developing countries, we have a duty of mentioning to the rest of the world and really kind of make it almost like one of those generations kind of, or circular information of letting people know that a person of color or a country of color, whether it's in Asia or in Jamaica or in Africa, is not a poor person. Yes, we do have a duty to do that. I think what we have done as an organization has, because of the environment of care that we've actually done with our beneficiaries, we've never really talked about the work that we do in the Netherlands. And yes, we are definitely going to start to, because that is one of the first things that I mentioned in the organization, that we actually need the buy-in of the Dutch community in itself, in them understanding that by being part of what we do as an organization is really contributing in a much bigger way to the discourse of decoloniality, the discourse of empowering without assuming that you come from a position of power. And so yes, I do believe that we can play a big role, and I hope that we'll be able to achieve it. That's certainly one of my focus areas with the organization, is how do we bring in the Dutch community into the work that we do? Because after all, we are of and created by the Dutch community. And even if we don't speak about the reach that we have outside, we at least need to be able to inform you about the great work that we are doing in creating the idea that, people from developing countries are not necessarily poor. Don't get me wrong. Poverty, need and abundance is not money and resources, right? It is respect, and it's respect and recognizing that just because someone is from Africa, it doesn't mean that they're coming with their hand held out. It means that they come into your space, or you go into their space in a place of equality and in a place of even stronger capabilities than you would ever imagine. I think the kind of ideas that have been created by colonialism has always been around the lack of education, lack of knowledge, lack of so many other things that are from the developing countries. But in actual fact, we have some of the most developed systems that people can learn from. But what we have, and I say we because now I'm living here, but what we have here is that we have an opportunity to really celebrate the work that we have been doing for a number of years, and maybe even elevating it or even scaling it up, because the Dutch population is possibly one of the most giving in the world in terms of development work. But I don't know how much of the Dutch community know that they are. outside of America. Yeah.
Also very good at taking.
They're very good at taking.
Yeah, the Dutch community.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to build on Bart's question and your response, is it ever going to be possible to make the balance fair, as it were, if the Prince Claus Fund is dependent on its patron, which is the royal family, and you talked about colonialism and colonial hangovers, so is it just inevitable that it's always going to feel imbalanced?
So is the imbalance going to be there, or will it be resolved? Is that the question?
Is it possible to resolve it when it's the Prince Claus form?
Yeah.
Is it possible to resolve it when it's the Prince Claus
yeah,
form? Okay.
that's a good question, and I've had conversations with some of my board members about this one, and one of them was that what is in the name, right? The balance will never shift to be fair, right? But I think what needs to constantly be in my mind, at least, is that I need to be able to create an opportunity and a space for my organization to constantly recognize that the balance needs to shift. Whether it will eventually shift is a different story. Mind you, the Prince Claus Fund is possibly the smallest of development organizations in the Netherlands. We have the least budget. We have literally very little. We are literally this tiny pond in this big, tiny fish in this huge pond. So it would be egotistical of me to think I could effect that kind of change. But I think that it is really more in the Netherlands population to take ownership of us, to be able to turn that around. Because ultimately, I don't think we can do it in our generation or maybe a few generations out. But if we can own the fact that we are, that we as an organization are a Dutch entity, and that the Dutch, in essence, own us, right? Then the powers that needs to be shifted are then beyond just us, but everyone. But I don't think we'll get it right. I don't look. It's a much bigger conversation than what we can ever have here, because the idea of imbalance is big. I mean, look at the state of affairs now in the world. How, when America makes certain decisions, that the rest of the world have to react in particular ways, and money becomes the decider, and other things. The political powers. So there's a lot more conversations around that I think that organization of our size and reach would be able to effect that kind of change. But we can certainly try from internally to make sure that the conversations we have is to highlight the fact that we are not wanting to sit in a position of power.
Last question. Oh, I have
Yeah,
two.
well, I'm Dutch, first of all. I don't like to be confused. we're confused enough with this government that we have at the moment, so I don't like to be confused. I like to be more hands-on, and this all sounds very theoretical. And I run a fund myself, and we give seed money, and it's an easy thing to do. The problem is in what you call developing countries, how do you find the applicants? It's all, I like to be a bit more practical. So how do you find the money? What kind of, how do you find the people? What kind of money do you give to them? How do you organize it?
Yeah.
It's nice to be with 16 people on Herengracht. We were almost neighbors. I worked for years 2 houses away from you. It's but it all sounds theoretical to me.
Yeah.
I want to be practical, hands-on, please.
So you want to know the specifics.
Yeah.
What would a funding look like
Yes.
Yeah.
in its practical sense?
Okay, so I'll answer your question because your question has quite a number of levels, right? So the first one is, how do we find our beneficiaries, right? We have open calls. The one thing that is really quite strong in the Prince Claus Fund is the fact that we have quite a wide network of people that have reach. And I've seen this even in my own country, where there's certain individuals that are part of our network that we can call on to either for research or to even put the word out there that there's an open call, please apply for this. So we use open calls in all our search for beneficiaries. It is a costly endeavor because, as you know, working in a fund, that you need to be able to have a dedicated team that then takes care of the open calls, and it's time consuming and all of that. And we use jury system to whittle them down and eventually choose the successful participants. So internally, we don't make any decisions to that matter. Our seed awardees get 5,000 euros, and it's a once-off payment. And what they need to do is that they just need to, and also our reporting is a little bit different from the normal ones, is that we make it quite interactive. We interview them, we speak to them, we find out how the money has been helpful to their quest or what they want to do. We give 10,000 euros to 12, or is it 10? Oh no, the numbers are confused, but I think it's 10,000 euros to our mentorship awardees in 2 tranches. So they get 60% of it to start their projects, and they get the 40% afterwards. And for our impact awards, then they get a monetary value of 50,000. And all of this is in our annual report. So it's really not a secret. In terms of our funding, we get our funding mostly from the lottery and from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we are not really funded by the royal family as much. Again, it's on our annual reports, you will find that. And then we have partnerships with a number of organizations to fund our mentorship programs. And we're constantly looking for new partnerships because it's again around pooling resources and collaboration. And we have one of our partners is the Goethe Institute from Germany, and then we also the Stimulierungsfonds here in the Netherlands. And then we also partner with an Arabic photographic organization called AFAC, which is our ADPP. So that's where we get our money. But what is really important about the work that we do is that in how we search for the participants, we also invest a lot in research. And that is why we can give the 5,000 euros without having to worry about how it gets accounted for, because we really do thorough research to make sure that what they're applying for is really happening. We have a lot of people that give us second and third opinions on the ground that we ask, and that they do their own research and report to us. So it's really it's a very transparent system that we use. And we welcome anyone to, if they want to really know how it really does, to come and check with us. But again, we share this in our annual report. We are very transparent in that sense.
I'm going to read it.
Please do. We do have our last year's one that's on the net now. It's yeah.
I've heard the tone, and I'm sure he's going to read it. Absolutely. I'm getting a nod from the tech guy to round it up. I hope that maybe somewhere we could still have the 2 pressing questions answered. But I would really like to thank you for this conversation. I wish we could go onward, but it's a Thursday and we got things to do, unfortunately, tomorrow. Give a round of applause for Marcus. Again, just make him feel at home.
Stay confused.
And also, thanks to Prince Claus Fund. Thank you for all of you who came, who sat here all quiet, silent, listening to this conversation, to everyone watching, wherever you are. And we hope to see you again for the next ZAM Studio event. Like I mentioned, this is the first setting, and it's very kind of spannend, as we would say in Dutch, because we have our main camera there, and it's quite exciting to feel the setting. And I would say, if you ask me, it's a true success. Also want to mention that you can find ZAM on all social media platforms. If you subscribe or are already subscribed to the newsletter, you won't miss out on any of the announcement or any following ZAM Studio event that will come up about art, our investigative journalism, or anything that you need to know about what's really happening on the African continent, with all of the questions included. Also, don't forget, if you want to see more of this, please donate. There's a donate button on the website. It enables us to keep doing what we are doing. So thank you and have a lovely night. And if we could give more of that love to Marcus again, give him another round of applause.